For far too long, the effective management of the customer's experience has been considered a soft skill. But today, successful companies recognize that the customer experience is king, or from my perspective, is queen. Welcome to CX Unplugged. I'm Gabrielle Gonzalez, your host, and in this series, you will hear from me and other industry experts about how prioritizing the customer experience led to amazing outcomes. Brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us on another episode of CX Unplugged by the Multifamily Media Network. Today, I've got a great group of esteemed guests to talk to us today about our topic, resident retention. It's not that obvious. Or is it? Let's examine the data and find out. I'm going to let my group of esteemed guests go ahead and introduce themselves. Katie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, Gabrielle, and nailed the title. That was excellent. My name is Katie Ritter. I'm the National Director of Multifamily here at Widewail. I run our multifamily vertical. Widewail is an online reputation company, and multifamily is one of our two verticals. And so we're obsessed with reviews and uncovering what people are really saying in them and the content, and then disseminating that to the industry. So thanks for having us on, and looking forward to chatting.
I am, excuse me, I'm Jake Hughes, Director of Marketing for Widewail. Spent 5 years at Car Gurus in the auto industry before moving over to Widewail, where we're split between auto and multifamily. I head up our original research part of the company, so involved with creating a lot of the data points. And sometimes my side hustle is being Katie's ghostwriter sometimes. So here to serve.
My LinkedIn ghostwriter. Yep.
All right. I'm Chelsea Johnson. I am the Property Marketing Manager for Bernstein Management Corporation. I'm responsible for carrying out the brand standards throughout our multifamily portfolio and our commercial portfolio as well.
Terrific. Well, we've got some, obviously some really good expertise, both on the data collection and delivery side, as well as the operations side. Katie, Jake, and Chelsea, thank you so much for being here with us today. And let's kind of dive in to this topic of resident retention and customer experience. Obviously, that's something that we're all super passionate about in our own kind of way. And, I'm really curious to find out, first of all, how this data collection process, like tell us about how do you collect the data, like how many communities are involved in this data, over what period of time, what time frame are we looking at? One of you guys tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Widewail created what we're calling the Voice of the Resident report, which we're trying to look at a representative of the entire industry about what's going on Google, what residents are saying about portfolios online, and what we can learn from the reviews, the content within them. So I think we came to this wine to show off the power of reviews, what you can learn from them, how to organize them, a framework to break them down and tag them and make sense of them, and ultimately measure resident experience. I think we observe and hear quite frequently that they're measuring resident experience is either hard or there isn't a clear framework for how to do it. And so we set out this year to try to figure that out. Can we measure resident experience? How do we go about presenting this information? What we ended up doing is pulling in Google reviews from 150 of the largest portfolios across the US. It amasses to about 500,000 reviews from the last year. And then we can go through and with AI, tag all these reviews, start to make sense of and learn what's said within the reviews, and categorize those into groups by topic, by positive and negative, and break those out by life cycle stage. And we can kind of get into a bunch of the topics that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I like the notion that you break it down into various topics. I was so excited. I mean, technology, the fact that we have this kind of technology that can really help us do this is terrific. And it's something that we, as operators, particularly in our business, should be leveraging. I got so excited when I was looking at how robust this report was as I was preparing for today's segment. There's so much really good data, and the way that it's been broken out to create like some benchmarks and various topics is awesome. So, how do you define benchmarks in that space?
Yeah, I can take the benchmarks. So the benchmarks is in those 400, almost 500,000 reviews that Jake mentioned, we break it out into a positive review, 4 or 5 stars, and then a negative review, 3 or below. So taking the positive reviews, we can say, okay, staff or people come up in 65% of positive reviews. That's our benchmark, 65%. So then from there, we can measure specific groups against that benchmark. Let's say at Bernstein, staff comes up, I'm making this up, staff comes up in 70% of positive reviews. You are above the benchmark. So we have 49 topics for both positive and negative that define and the percentage of how often they come up, and that defines the benchmark. So we can really drill in after that into, okay, let's just look at tour reviews. How often does staff come up in tour reviews? They come up 70% of the time. They come up more often than the benchmark. So now we're drilling in to each of those life cycle stages. And what we'll talk about today is renewal and what topics are just more prevalent in those renewal reviews when folks are talking about, signing on for another year. So that's how we define benchmark.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that really does help clear it up, and it's really a great comprehensive way to take a look at that data. And you mentioned renewals. Let's kind of drill down into that piece of it and talk about what is there any particular piece or data point that stands out in that renewal segment?
Yeah, so I've come up with a few things here. I'll just start with one, and then I'm curious to kick it over to Chelsea to get your take on the report, because I believe we originally met through the report. You saw it online,
Yes.
and it stuck out to you. When you originally saw it, what did you first gravitate towards? Which piece of it?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest thing for me is I've always known that resident experience is really so important. But at the same time, and it's not just our organization, a lot of organizations in the multifamily industry ask themselves, like, what can we do to retain, residents? Because that's, this, as the saying goes, it's cheaper to keep her, right? And what happens is sometimes they forget about the most basic thing, which is having the right person in the right place impacts the resident experience, right? So that's training, hiring the right staff, but also because the onsite teams is the number one thing that's mentioned. We talked about tours and how they're niche in management. We talk about maintenance can be a positive or a bad thing, and that has to do with people again, right? Maintenance staff. And then the other commonality is just really communication. Those were the things that stood out to me because I thought about the report and how onsite teams are 64% of the time mentioned in reviews, and then maintenance is the number two thing, I guess, or number one thing for bad reviews. But it has to do with people. And on both sides, it comes down to communication. So when we ask ourselves the question of what can we do to retain people, it's getting back to the basics of hiring the right people, making sure that they know the importance of communication, whether it's good or bad that we're relaying to residents, and keeping them informed. But I also attended a property management association conference here locally, and the session was more focused on HR, but I talked about how HR can partner with marketing in that training process. So level setting brand standards before that new associate goes on site, and they have that expectation of what their interaction, communication, presentation should look like with prospects and residents to help address what are the top two things when it comes to good and bad reviews, which are on-site team experience and maintenance.
This connects
I
pretty
like
well
the-
to
Yeah, go ahead, Jake.
so my first quick win for retention is expectation setting. And we see this in the data in a few different ways. Ultimately, this comes down to communication. Quality communication sets proper expectations, which hopefully help you, even if the final outcome isn't perfect. They know what they're going to get as a resident beforehand, which can help create a more amenable situation for everyone. So, two examples: amenities come up a lot in negative reviews related to renewal, which I think is interesting because it's, when you're trying to attract a resident, amenities is a big deal. It's right there at the top of positive reviews, but it spikes by 80% in negativity related to renewal. And our interpretation of that is because of missed expectations. Something that the resident was sold on during the tour phase doesn't live up to expectation at the end. Another stat is price increases, which this is not surprising, really, but I think there's some nuance that is telling. We also look at rent and we look at price as two other topics that are related. And price increases, the price kind of going up and not being stable, not meeting the original expectation, is spiking the most in negative mentions within reviews. So when I looked at this one layer deeper, we have the topic tagging data from the report, but then also using AI to run a block of free text reviews through and see what is said in more human terms. These related terms came up: perceived value, unexpected fees, and transparent billing came up as problems related to cost within retention renewal reviews.
And I think those things go down to what you said, Chelsea, of communication. And I like what you said about communicating the good and the bad. I think folks just are looking for transparency, right? And give me what I'm dealing with. I don't need to hear like, oh, no, we're not adding this or we're not doing this. It's early and often communication about rent increases. I'm curious from your perspective, when do those cadences start for you? Like, when are you starting to communicate about rent increases, renewal period, all of that to hear? Because some of the other commentary was, unclear terms, or it was a week before and I didn't have time to make a decision. I'm wondering what that cadence typically looks like as an operator when you start communicating that.
So rent increases can, those cases can look different at every organization, but for us, we have a team that reviews rent rates at every property each week. It makes the adjustments where needed based on, their own set of measurements. Obviously the goal is always to drive, profit for the organization, but sometimes that cadence is also dropping, rents based on trend. So there's a dedicated team that looks at it every week, and by Wednesday they'll send out whether it's an increase or it's decreases to the rest of the internal team, and that includes the on-site team members, so they're aware of what those price adjustments are.
So
Got it.
Yeah, so you've got Chelsea, you guys have an internal team that's and are they looking at the data, this data too, to help them maybe drive some of that decision?
That's a really good question. No, they're more, I would say analysts and looking at numbers, trends of the property than they are, saying, okay, how is the communication on site? There's other team members, including our marketing team, that are looking at those smaller details, they care about those details because they ask, even when a
Yeah.
unit's sitting too long, like, why are these units sitting and not available for rent? They're looking at that too. They care about, what is communication, but they're not drilling down into that. That's more of the support teams to help the on-site teams, clear up what could be issues of communication. Marketing saying, can we support you all with, email blasts to residents, creating flyers if it's like a shutdown elevator, or rolling out dwell wells into a new property. We would support them in that communication to keep maintenance issues in regards to poor communication at bay. But yes, it's a dedicated uh, analyst team that looks at those trends to determine if prices go up and down.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really interesting. It's my stream of consciousness and all of this is going, God, this like resident sentiment data could also be, that's coming in real time. That could also be like a tangible factor in driving some of those decisions, like per
Definitely.
property, or, where is this property hitting within those benchmarks,
Mhm.
and so not to just hijack the whole thing for you, but so Chelsea, you were saying that you've got this dedicated team and they're communicating with your properties weekly, it sounds like, right? But then
Mhm.
how far out generally are people reaching out to residents to let them know, or to begin communicating with them, hey, your lease is going to be up, and here's what the terms are, and like I'm wondering how far out are operators really starting these days, and then also what are they saying? Are you saying like, your rent's going to go up $100 now, or do you just say, hey, come talk to us about it, or like what does that process look like?
Yeah. So we reach out to residents at about a 90 days prior to that first contact. It's 90 days prior to when their lease is up. And it does say in the letter what that rent change will be. And it also lists out, if they don't renew and do month to month, what that would be as well. I would say for the most part, once they get that initial contact, that's when, if someone's on the border of thinking about renewing, and there's something holding them up, that's when they reach out to like the property manager. And in some cases, it's just maybe they've been in that unit for 10 years, because we have a lot of longstanding residents. I mean, 10, 20, 30 plus years, because we have a lot of historical buildings in the DC metropolitan area. And so they most likely have not had appliance updates or changed. So that's probably their question. And, people want to make sense out of the dollar that they're paying. And so if you've been there for a long time and you haven't had an appliance update, that's going to most likely be their request. And we're always willing to work with people, especially in cases like that, because it just seems it's a no-brainer at that point, right? Like, it's do what's right for the customer. Our organization motto is people first. And so we definitely take that stance. I would say another trend of questions, whether they're long time or short term, they've been there only like a couple of years, would be like fresh painting or carpet cleaning. And so, we get those requests, and we thought about it because our organization also has like this retention committee, and it's really focused on what can we do to be ahead of this and be more proactive instead of reactive. And so that is having possible benchmarks. An organization could look at that, where if someone's renewing after a year, free carpet cleaning automatically offered, put in the letter so people know that's offered to them, and they're like, okay, I'm getting something out of this for this maybe $50 or $100 increase. 5 years, fresh paint, whatever those benchmarks are, those are great things to incorporate as a way to make that resident feel like it's just not about them signing this lease and they're just a number.
Yeah.
We care. And so here's what we can offer you as well, because we can't control. I mean, we have to drive profits. So obviously there will be rent increases, but people want to feel seen and heard. So I feel like you can kind of give them that, and it helps with maintenance of the property. So
Mhm.
it's really a win-win for everyone in that situation when you offer those things.
Yeah, I like the proactiveness of saying, hey, we can do this.
Mhm.
That perceived value point, Jake, that you said, that comes up a lot with price increases. It's not necessarily the increase itself. It's that, what am I
Yes.
understand. I think everyone generally understands that rent is probably going to go up. It's that value that they're getting out of it. And I think when we look at the data and look at the positive reviews and what topics come up above the benchmark, we see neighbors, safety, maintenance, which we mentioned, but that neighbors and safety piece, like if we know that this is really important, that we have a safe community, I imagine, like, if you've made upgrades to add a new, whatever, new locks or security cameras or things like that, do you ever include property upgrades in those emails? Like, hey, we've done this. This is what we've done this year. We've heard you. We know safety is important. Things like that. Do you include some of those? If there were upgrades, do you include those as well?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say this. We can do better at communicating them, but we do upgrades, and our on-site team, we really rely on them to communicate that to the residents when
Mm-hmm.
there are renovations and such. But just you asking that question made me think, like, it's good to just still remind people of what's been done, because it's easy to forget
Mm-hmm.
things. We get stuck onto
Totally.
the negative, right? So,
Totally. Yeah.
kind of jumping in it just drove an idea in my head, is jumping in as a marketing team to say, all right, well, we know that this property had this lobby refresh 6 months ago. Let's send out an email blast about it, encourage the on-site team to maybe do another resident event in that refresh lobby.
Mm-hmm.
Just to remind the residents that, hey, we're invested and we care. And, this is one improvement we've done, but like we will continue to do more. So we do it. We rely on the on-site teams to communicate it, but just in that question, I'm realizing, we can, make it more rounded and robust feeling by tagging and marketing with that, and then partnering with on-site teams to highlight it again.
Your original idea about at certain years, certain upgrades come along with
Yeah.
it reminds me of a job track. I haven't worked at too many bigger companies, so whatever they're called, when you kind of have the pre-described job track of there's this level and then this level, and you need to achieve these things to get to this next level, and that's what people seek as they move up in their career, is clarity on what they need to do to achieve the next thing. It seems like a good communication technique. Clarity on what happens at certain renewal points throughout the tenure.
Yeah, it makes people feel good. I mean, when they don't even have to ask for it. And usually, if you're offering it up first,
Yeah.
you're able to come up with a more cost-effective option than some of the extreme requests, right? So it's a good approach to have in a proactive manner.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really also you're keying in right on the data point about communication that came up, right? So you're being able to use that data to drive your strategy in terms of execution and overcome that, and operate at a higher level than the benchmark. So it's like you're right on track with that. It makes sense. I'm curious to know if there's any particular like data point in there with respect to renewal that resonates with you most, or in particular that you really resonates with you could share with us.
Sorry, I'm looking over to my notes. I'll say this. So, we talked about location, we talked about community and amenities. Sometimes, like, and I think a lot of people watching this will relate, that sometimes you're really limited. Like, you can't pick up and change the location of the property, and maybe that property is too small that you can't do a lot of amenities, right? Again, it comes back to making the resident feel like they're getting a bang for their dollar. So sometimes you have to be really creative. If your on-site team isn't good at doing like resident events or experiences, find someone, whether it's your marketing team, somebody internally who is, make it easy for them. Whether it's a pre-packaged box that you're sending to that on-site team, just literally open the box up, set up a table, do this. They can incorporate even like non-in-person things, like guess the number of candy corns. Like we're running this at a couple of properties. Guess the number of candy corns in this jar. 3 winners will get gift cards. You just have to think outside the box when you can't move a property and maybe its location isn't the best location that you can brag about, or it's small and it doesn't offer a lot of options for amenities. People are looking for community, and that was also on that report as well. So creating
Yeah.
a sense of community can help with those things that you just can't control, but you have to work around.
Yeah,
That's
that's a
what
great point.
stood out to me.
Yeah. The neighbors piece is came up 104% more in
Yeah.
positive reviews than the benchmark for the renewal phase. And to your exact point, it comes down to that feeling you have, and it's really hard to measure a feeling. It's hard to measure community and connection and neighbors. And so the more times you see it come up in your positive reviews, it's like, okay, I think we're doing something right here. And focusing on the controllables, like you said, these are things that I can control my interactions with residents. I can control how we connect. I can't control where this building's located, and I can't build a new gym over here. I can't add, I can't add these amenities. So I think that's spot on.
You could kind of just black out a number of the data points in here because they're somewhat fixed. You don't have any active control. But I suppose it is helpful to know that location's number 3 in positive reviews related to retention. So maybe it's helpful in a lot of scenarios as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, just having the data is really helpful to drive and craft the conversation that you're having with residents as well, right? During that renewal process. Because if you know that location maybe is, not one of the strengths, right? You can utilize that information to craft a conversation to either avoid that topic or, find better ways to present the location, right? Or to enhance the perception of the location. Maybe it's with respect to how close it is to their job, or how walkable the area is, or how safe it is, or, you know what I mean? There's how great the parking is or isn't, or, there's a lot of ways that you can craft that narrative around the location if that's what your data is showing you. So, I mean, I think the data is still really important, even if they're things that you can't control physically or from an execution perspective, you can still help use that data to help craft the conversation and the narrative around it to drive that experience, right? So it sounds like you guys are already kind of like you're already sort of doing that a little bit. So that's awesome. I'm curious, Chelsea, maybe if there's like what's one of the wins you guys have? And if you can think of a story from your experience with your portfolio, one of the real wins from the renewal perspective, where you were able to sort of utilize some of the data and drive a really great renewal outcome.
Yeah. So I'll say I will highlight someone who does a really great job on our on-site teams of proactively getting with the residents who are up for renewal. She personally has conversations with them and will actually break down costs and say that, I understand that you're not excited about this price increase. Unfortunately, this is, we have to do this because this is company standard. However, have you looked at what it would cost to move to another location? And she'll sit down with them and then show them that breakdown. And when they see that it would cost them more to move, put down a new deposit, all the expenses that come with moving, which we all know are expensive, finding movers, truck, all that stuff. They're like, okay, well, maybe this, $100 or $50 or $75 is not that bad in hindsight, because then she takes also the price of that property and compares it to our competitors, which would be in the same area, especially if their move is not related to a job relocation. And then they see, okay, so I would be paying more somewhere else. I would be paying to relocate. And when I look at it that way, it is better for me to say, it's not like I don't like the property. I do. I just don't want to pay more. No one does. But when that happens, people are like, okay, they renew early and they stay. It worked really well that when she shared that story with others, other property managers do that as well. But sometimes it takes those one-on-one conversations, like to what we just discussed. It's good to know the information, right? The drivers are of what makes someone want to leave. Sometimes if you just break down the numbers, and although those other things are bad, you can also use that opportunity to say, hey, I hear your concerns about these other things, the amenities or the communication issues. We will work on that as an organization. You put those and acknowledge, hey, we've made a mistake there, but we'll address those things. And then you show them pricing. I think you can win over a lot of people that way, because that means they're still interested. They're just looking for you to sell them. So you can sell them on that front.
Yeah. Well, and it shows, it sounds like this person who you were referring to also is someone who took the time, right, to sit down, have the conversation, kind of dive into the numbers. And that, I think probably that in and of itself communicates that they care, right, to that resident, which also goes back to your sense of community, right? Is because I care. So it's not just like filling out the form and signing it. And, something else you made me think of when you were saying that about like comparing and contrasting the cost of moving, but also, one of the things that I think can be super helpful as well is comparing, like just communicating with the residents, like on, our rent went up, and they think, well, geez, you guys didn't really do anything, but being able to like have that all broken down, like maybe our property taxes went up, you know what I mean? Like, so being able to tell residents, and there's no harm in telling residents, well, you know what, property taxes went up 2%. Our utility bills have increased 11%. So some of what we thought were essentially fixed expenses have gone up X percentage. We invested, I used to like telling people, just to get a quick snapshot of your capital improvements for the last year. Well, we invested 1.2 million in capital improvements back into the property last year for maybe not, amenity enhancements, but just things that needed to be done to maintain this particular asset. So those are dollars that are being reinvested into the asset. And it isn't just about, we're not just trying to drive profits. We have to, just to maintain what we've got here, we gotta more. So I think even having both of those, being able to share both of those angles and showing people that you're, taking the time to look into that and then present that with them can be awesome. Sorry,
I think
I just went down
hearing
a
all
rabbit hole
that.
there.
No, that's great. Because I had the same thought of like breaking down the actual what goes into your rent. And I think hearing that from the human being on site is so impactful versus an general email from someone they've never talked to from the management company. We find that the people are so much more willing to engage and have a positive experience with the human, but they won't, if it's a negative experience, they won't mention the human. They'll mention the system, the management company, the person behind the curtain. And so I think that transparency through the one-on-one interaction is so important, and that's what people are craving, to receive that not so great information sometimes in their minds.
Yeah, because a lot, and to your point, it's just there's a lot of work that's done that isn't always seen aesthetically, right? And so yes, it can always, it's one of those things, communication can always be worked on and it can always be improved. And so communicating that so people see that the building is being cared for, even behind the scenes, and the lovely penthouse, which isn't like the pretty thing that you see on TV, but maintenance is happening. So yeah.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, gosh, we had to fill the potholes. We had to do, $20,000 worth of tuck pointing. We had to, replace the floor in the amenity area. That cost us, $62,000. But I think, and sometimes hearing those numbers, like those of us who have been in the business for a while, that sounds like, oh yeah, it's probably a pretty good deal. But like, if you're not in property management and you're going in to talk to the people about, your $100 rent increase, and they slap out there to you, well, we spent 62,000 on flooring replacement last year. That's like, oh, wow, holy cow, that almost helps them substantiate it in their mind at that moment.
Definitely.
So, all right.
Sweet.
The details on management changes I want to get into a little bit, and
Yeah.
that stood out to me as the most surprising thing I uncovered in this. We continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the data and find more and more little details, and what we found is that a number of negative reviews within the management category, which is very broad and vague, and that's sort of the shortcomings of this information, is that when a management company changes over, ownership changes over, which that happens a lot, that can cause a lot of friction. And it's not, in many ways, it's not terribly surprising. Issues with transition problems, management being unresponsive. I don't know. The context of that can be very specific, but loss of familiarity, policy changes, all these things come up often in negative reviews as the negative externalities of a management change. Do you have any personal experience with that, Chelsea, and how you've dealt with that?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, in most cases, it's like in acquisition phases where we've acquired a property, and prior to acquisition, those residents had issues with that management company. And so not only are we having to set a new precedent for who we are as an organization and what we'll bring to the table to the residents, but it's addressing those concerns because they had those fears from what they experienced before. So in those phases of acquisition, what we do from a marketing standpoint is proactively inform residents of the acquisitions happening. We're going to be a new property management company. So they'll get multiple letters. There's that partnership with that organization too, to make sure letters are posted in hallways and an email blast to the residents to let them know that we will be the new management company. And then from there, it's really just upholding what are our brand standards. So usually our on-site team will host some type of like welcome or hello to the residents event after acquisition and ownership as a way to break that barrier and just introduce who are the property manager, assistant property manager, and just the on-site team who will be helping the residents at that property. So that's pretty much our standard or process. It's been more of like we're kind of showing those residents they can entrust in us, that will be a better experience than their previous management company, and informing them along the way in the process of acquisition, and then having this initial hello meet and greet session afterwards, after acquisition and acquiring the property.
For acquisition, how do you go about understanding what the lingering issues are that you're sort of walking into?
Yeah, honestly, so lots of departments will come and walk the building. And what's interesting is if it is, people are not happy, they'll ask like, oh, who are you guys? Because they're just seeing new faces dressed with, in branded attire. And so honestly, residents will tell us a lot of times. But we also do a resident survey before acquisition as well, just to get a feel for the community. There, in a most recent acquisition, there were funds to also do community improvements. And so our marketing team helped develop this, questionnaire to get an idea of what the residents would really want at the property. So we could have just came in there and just said, hey, we're going to take these funds and do these improvements. We took a step back and decided, like, let's hear out what the current residents want to see and take those in consideration when making improvements to the property. So those were some of the things that we've done: take multiple tours, get a feel for the property, send out surveys to figure out, what are the pain points, what are the positive things, and then just drive as much information from the current residents as possible, so that as we go in and making a game plan for this property, we're doing the right things and not guessing and missing the mark.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I'm curious, Chelsea, if you have in place yet, or you maybe don't even have enough time, you haven't had enough time yet to do those things, but even have a place like to close that loop, that communication loop on the back end. So like, 6 months in or in a year later, whatever those, time frames would be, to go back and communicate back to the residents, hey, when we first acquired, you guys, we asked you guys and you said these are the things that were most interesting to you. And here's where we are on those things, to even help continue to drive that engagement, and to help, get those residents on board with you as a new management company or owner.
Yeah. So our on-site teams are responsible for communicating that. And like I was thinking about earlier, it's like that partnership with marketing and helping the on-site teams to remember when we do know about some of these changes, and they were on that survey, because we review that survey as well, helping them to remember either sending that reminder communication out to residents and or just us partnering to do it. But our on-site teams drive that communication with residents. We will step in some cases. But usually when we're going through that process of whatever that request is, the residents are informed beforehand. So if it's gym renovations or updates, they're informed beforehand that it's happening, because usually sometimes there are inconveniences. And so we prepare them for that up front. And then when the project is done, the on-site teams will make sure to circle back with residents to let them know that project has been completed.
Jake, I see you chomping at the bit there, I think. You got a question.
Katie has a 4 p.m. actually, so we should cut this out.
Oh,
sorry. It's a little housekeeping.
Little housekeeping. He was chomping at the bit. Yes.
Chomping at the bit. If you guys want to keep going, please feel free. But yes, I could be a couple minutes late too.
Well, I mean, I think you guys have, there's some, it seems to me, there's some great information here. I guess, the last question that I'm curious to learn maybe from you, Chelsea, is how you may utilize this, how you're able to kind of utilize some of this voice of resident data, right, to drive what you're planning to do and kind of the changes or things you want to implement in terms of retention for next year.
Yeah. Honestly, it's being more proactive with on-site teams, reaching out to them directly and saying, hey, what do you think about sending out, this to residents, or trying this out? So one is just practically reaching out to on-site teams and making suggestions based on what this report has listed. Supporting teams, even with like resident events. Like I'll set up reminder emails for that resident event to drive traffic to the event, communication with residents, as a way to show on-site teams too what you can do to make sure you're sending that information out proactively and keeping people informed of what's coming up and what's going on. And then just really throwing out suggestions when I visit properties, taking everything in. Just because your title may not be maintenance, may not be operations or leasing, I encourage everyone to visit their properties, get a feel for the traffic, what's happening in the community around it, what that team deals with on a day-to-day. You can better support them more proactively, taking the data of these reports around communication, amenities, location, reviews. If you're able to sit on site at those properties, you can really help them out more proactively, because you got a better feel for what's happening there and what that team faces every day. So that's what I do too. I'll spend time on site and just work out of there, and that way I can make suggestions, and I'm observing things from a brand standard that we could more proactively address ahead of time. Are great ways to just supporting our on-site teams, and that way we're addressing these concerns that were mentioned in the report.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate everyone's time. I know we're kind of on a tight time schedule, but I just thought maybe as we wrap it up, Katie, I know you're heading on out, but I didn't know, Jake or Katie, if either one of you wanted to just maybe wrap up the maybe the top data pieces, outtakes from this voice of resident data, just for our audience to maybe, just kind of their little takeaway of these are the top 5 positive, negative, whatever, so they can keep that in mind moving forward as well.
Yeah. Jake, I can take a couple of the positive points, stick you with the negative.
Your thing.
So the most mentions above the benchmark in renewal are, I'll do the top 3. Leasing process, so making it really easy for folks to renew. They understand the terms, communicating early and often. Then that is 113% more common in renewal reviews. People in the positive sense are saying this was really easy. Neighbors and safety. So creating that sense of community, people want a safe, quiet, respectful place to live. And I think finding ways to remind them of that and make sure that they feel that is really important. So those are the top three most mentioned topics in those renewal positive reviews.
Thanks.
On the negative side, for the most often mentioned topics during renewal, maintenance is number 1. Maintenance comes up a ton in this report throughout all life cycle stages. When residents are coming to that final part of their lease and deciding what to do next, if they've been well taken care of from a maintenance perspective, it's very influential. And on the flip side, if it hasn't worked out, it's going to impact things. Management is number 2. It's sort of a proxy for the system, proxy for the people. Management comes up as a consistent problem. Number 2, and then third is rent. And you can't get away from the money component. It's going to be very influential within this moment.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I feel like that's some really great data and takeaway for everyone. Chelsea, you as an operator and those of our audience as well, to be able to either utilize that data to influence execution and or to help them craft a narrative to really drive customer experience. So thank you all for being here today on this episode of CX Unplugged by the Multifamily Media Network. I appreciate your time, and I think you guys have really given some great info for all of our audience. So appreciate it, and hope everyone will join us next time for our next episode on Multifamily Media Network. CX Unplugged, where we have redefined who your customer really is. Join me next time to hear more missteps and masterful manifestations in the world of multifamily customer experience. Brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network.